Good evening. So for some of you, welcome back to this room. For those of you who were here this morning, you spent a lot of time in this room, and a lot of your best memories, I think, a lot of your best memories from this school happened in this room. I don't know how many of the worst ones, but I think some stories about that as well. In any case, it's a pleasure to invite you all, or to welcome you all to the, I think we're up to 8th annual Walt Fisher Lecture. This is a combination, really, of two important events for the school. One is to, every year, invite back an alumnus, or not, of the school or of one of its major tributaries, what we refer to as Old Annenberg, which some of us try not to take personally, or the former Department of Communication Arts and Sciences in the college that were merged to create the Annenberg School in which we sit. And the second is to honor the contributions and role of Walt Fisher, who, if you haven't met him, if I have to tell you anything more about Walt Fisher than you haven't Googled yet, you can do that. But Walt was not only for many years a distinguished member of this faculty, a director of the school, a leading figure in the field, one of the major contributors to the school that we are all still in, and therefore it's a very appropriate person to, for whom to name this series. I think it's really a valuable and important thing, particularly within a doctoral program in the school, which has a doctoral program at its center, to connect with, recognize, and relate to the accomplishments of our distinguished alumni. This is particularly important for those of you who are deciding which doctor's program to attend, to realize that however impressive they may be, they started here. And to let you know how impressive today's speaker is, I'd like to invite Peggy McLaughlin, who is responsible for everything that our speaker has accomplished.
Everything she knows. And I have the proof positive right here that she did in fact graduate from Southern California. It's standing right here. There you are. Thank you. Okay, well I came to USC in 1982. And I came out for an interview in April of that year, and I met both Walt and Sandi on the same day. And Sandi was my second advisee. And Walt was my neighbor down the hall, and we had lots of interesting conversations about scholarly publishing, because we were both editing journals at the same time, and about the narrative paradigm, because I think there were a lot of us who were very interested in storytelling, and I think Walt's work was very influential in the way that we thought about it. And Sandi and I were interested in organizational storytelling. That is, how people tell stories in organizations as a way to socialize newcomers. And we published a few papers, and I had to go into the real depths of my CV in order to find these, because it was a long time ago, but I found Smith and McLaughlin, 1986, Thematic Dimensions of Organizational Storytelling, an ICA paper, and Smith, McLaughlin, and Altendorf being the first advisor, Canonical Story Structures and the Persistence of Cultural Themes and Stories Told to Organizational Newcomers. Now those are pretty trendy sounding titles. You can hear papers on those topics today. And then Sandi left us and went to Purdue for her first job. And she and I wrote yet another paper about organizational stories in 1987. And we would send drafts of this digitally across BitNet. Does anybody remember BitNet? Well, the transmission speed was phenomenally slow, but we thought we were pretty technologically famous for doing this sort of thing. So anyhow, if you fast forward about 30 years, I would say that the student has far surpassed the mentor, judging by her CV. Sandi is professor and director of the Center for Health and Risk Communication at Michigan State, where she has received a Distinguished Faculty Award. She's very involved in the International Communication Association. She's been chair of the Interpersonal Division. She's won the Fisher Mentorship Award, and she's won an award for her work on interpersonal communication research. She's done a lot of work in the area of health communication, tackling topics like smoking cessation, college student drinking, breast cancer, and most recently, organ donation. And this work has been supported by the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute, National Science Foundation, and a variety of other impressive sounding organizations. So today she's going to talk about stories as fits the occasion. Story within a story, social influence in organ donation. Sandi.
Thank you. You know, it's always an honor to be asked back to your alma mater, and it also caused me to think and to really appreciate the education that I received here. It was extremely eclectic, and it's positive because I'll tell a story, of course, this being a talk about stories. It's positive because I was at ICA or NCA, and I can't remember which one, and I was in an elevator with one other person who was a young man, obviously a graduate student, and I had on my badge, and it said Sandi, you know, in big letters, and then Michigan State University underneath it, where I'm currently a professor, and I have been for some time. And he kept looking at me very strangely, and looking at my badge, and I was feeling kind of unsure of what was going on, so I just said, well, hi, I'm Sandi, I'm from Michigan State, and he said, I know, you come from that place that's monoparadigmatic. Which, for my department, it's very true. So I went back to the next faculty meeting and told the story, and people were saying things like, damn right. But then Frank Boster said, no, wait. Once we had a rhetorician who came in and gave a colloquium. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, Walt Fisher. So who could break the line at Michigan State from the post-positivist perspective to rhetorical studies? Only Walter Fisher. So this is an interesting day for me to be able to talk. Well, maybe a little bit. I had a terrific education here. All of you who are considering this program, it was wonderful. And it really was eclectic all the way, you know, through. Many of my former professors sitting in the room right now. So what I want to do today is tell you a little bit about where we're going with the talk. And I was inspired to give a talk that's like this because of a class that I took from Walter, where he explained to us very patiently that we weren't going to be the first person ever to have thought of an idea. But in fact, we were just going to be somebody, and if we were lucky, we were going to have something to say about this story that was ongoing, but truly it wouldn't be our own story. And so I was lucky enough to begin this research that I'm going to talk to you tonight about way back in 1989. And it was an interesting time for organ donation research in general and organ donation science. So what I want to do is kind of play around a little bit with where the larger story has been and where it is compared to my much smaller part or other people in our field who have done social science research looking at social influence in organ donation. And so what I'm going to try and do then is to intersect these stories by telling you a few of the different studies I've done over time and then showing you a graph about that particular year, how many people were on waiting lists, and that particular year, how many organs were donated. Not how many donors there were, but how many organs were donated. So it wasn't really that long ago that the first successful transplant occurred, and it was in Boston between two identical twins. And oddly enough, I really didn't realize this. I did a little research for the talk. But it was a living donation, was the first successful donation. And they actually were extremely happy, not only for the medical outcomes, but for the psychological outcomes as well. Even today, in living donation, there are sometimes when people donate and there are some severe psychological reactions. But in general, it's seen as a fairly safe practice for both the donor and for the recipient. Then the first deceased transplant occurred in 1962, also in Boston. And in this transplant, the patient lived for 21 months with these new anti-rejection drugs that were out at the time, and that was considered very successful. Kidney transplant is the #1 need in the United States today because of renal failure. And I'm going to give you a preview to say right now, as of yesterday when I looked, there are over 113,000 people on the waiting list, but almost 80% of them are waiting for kidneys. And because we have 2 kidneys, live donation is possible. So that problem can be taken care of perhaps. The first organ procurement organizations were established in 1968, not just in Boston, but here in Los Angeles too. And that was the year that the government came up with what's called the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. And it made an organ donor card a legal document in all states that said that if you signed that, you could legally donate your organs upon your death. We're going to talk a little bit later about practices which don't necessarily follow this first-person consent. But the act also banned the sale of organs and tissues in the United States. So as a social influence researcher, what are the ultimate goals here if we want to help this effort? And I know there are reasons why some people might be hesitant to try and help the effort, but I've always kind of fallen on the side of wanting to help this effort. And so the main thing to do is we want to be able to increase the organs that are available for transplant. There should be plenty in the United States to meet our needs, but in fact, it's more of a social issue in the sense that people don't consent. So the first thing to do is to encourage people to document their wishes, whether it's pro or con. And if you don't want to do it, definitely take the next step and tell your family about your wishes, because it's something we'll talk about a little bit later. But if in fact you do, then you should tell your family about your wishes too. So the dependent variables in a lot of this research that you're going to see that we've done are whether or not now somebody signs up on a state organ donor registry and whether or not they've talked to their family about their wishes. I'm not going to have enough time to talk about the research I've done on living donation, but maybe during the Q&A, if you want to ask a question or two, I could tell you about that, because I've been working with the University of Michigan Hospital in their transplant center doing some work down there. So those are ultimate goals there. In 1989, as Peggy told you, I was at Purdue University, and a fairly new professor teaching Persuasion, which I'd had here from Mike Cody. And one of my students, Lee Ford, said, you know, there's this interesting new area, and I want to study this in the Persuasion class and come up with some kind of a study on organ donation. And I really didn't know too much about it. And she said, but I think I'm going to need your help. So I said, oh, okay, great, we can work together. And the thing that I really wanted to say to all of you in the room who are incoming graduate students, hopefully here, is that you have a lot of influence over us as professors. And I didn't realize this at the time that I was a graduate student. You do. You think that you're going to learn from somebody else, but we learn from you, and you inspire us, and you help us find, you know, new areas of research and new things that we didn't know. And Lee got tired of this and left, and I'm still doing it today. So she didn't think it was as great as I did. But what we were doing in this study was we were taking the elaborated likelihood model of persuasion, and we were taking message variables. And so to me, communication research is about messages in one form or another. And we were interested in one-sided versus refutational arguments. So if I want to persuade somebody to be an organ donor, should I just give them a message that tells them all the good reasons why they should? Or should I try and find out what concerns they have or what reasons they have for not donating, and to try to counter-argue those? So of course we believe that the counter-arguing would be the absolute best way to go, and we were proven wrong. One-sided messages were much more memorable and led to people taking, we had the actual cards that they could take off the surveys we gave them. No web surveys at this time. So it really got us to thinking, and you'll see that this one finding really inspired a lot of research I'm going to talk to you about today. what was going on there? Why would it be that counter-arguing wasn't good? Well, you probably could give me an answer right now, somebody. I'll see. Organ donation. Why wouldn't counter-arguing be good? Because people have so many fears and misconceptions. And in reality, I think Cody did a study on the media and different things that the media propagates about organ donation. And of course, they love to get the urban myths and to put things into TV programs. And these things can really affect people for a long time. A study I'm not going to talk about that was really done by one of my colleagues, but I was kind of on her research team, took a rather gory autopsy from crossing Jordan, and we showed it to people. And then we had one group where we showed the real film or the real clip, and then we cleaned it up, and then we had one where we just talked about it. And the more extreme one, the one that had really been shown on TV, actually lowered people's intentions to want to become organ donors, increased medical mistrust, and it lasted for 3 months when we stopped testing them. So it was still operative 3 months out. So people had a lot of really concerns that we came to grips with later on. So here's kind of my what was going on. There's where I graduated from USC, right there in 1986. And there weren't even 10,000 people on the waiting list, and there were probably about 4,000 organs donated that year. And then 1989, when we started the research here, you can see there were probably about 17,000 people on the waiting list. And what you can see here, these are the living donations, and these are the deceased donations for each of the years. And the reason that there's such a disparity is because somebody who's deceased can give about 8 organs to one that somebody who's living can. But I just want you to pay attention because you're going to see how this gap just widens and widens over time. Well, we were lucky that we didn't know Michael Jordan or anything like that, but we were lucky that we were kind of in this right about when the first public health campaign came around in 1992. And 1996 started a big campaign that's still going called Share Your Life, Share Your Decision with Michael Jordan. Other ones are in Michigan, we have a heart that you get on your driver's license, so it's called Show Us Your Heart. Many campaigns have been funded by HRSA from the Department of Transplantation. And I always get that confused and think it's the Department of Transportation, but it's really transplantation. And the end of this talk today, I'm going to show you what went on for 2 years in a campaign that we ran funded by them. Well, at Michigan State, we work on research teams. And so you're going to see a lot of names on different studies that are up here. These were some of my graduate students in Lee Ford. Once again, we were back with the elaborated likelihood model. But we were thinking that maybe what was going on was interesting because a Gallup poll had just come out that said that 80% of the people in the United States favored organ donation, but yet only about 20% of the people had organ donor cards at the time. So we thought, well, what could be going on here if all these people have thought about it before, and if they intend to do it, maybe we better quickly, as you can tell we were at Michigan State by then, create a scale and study this. So that's exactly what we did. Amongst other findings, we found out that when this prior thought and intent to enroll in an organ donor registry one way or another was high, people really centrally processed the messages we were giving them, and 86% of them took the cards. But when it was low, only about 59% were taking the cards. So we were thinking, well, obviously what you need to do is just move those people who are low in this prior thought and intent to be higher, and surely everything will be fine. It didn't really turn out to be that way. And you can see now that we're jumping in 94. We were at 23,000. Now we're at 35,000 people here on this list. And we were at 16,000, and we're only about 18,000 there. This is a pattern you're going to see over time as we go through the talk. My graduate student at the time, Jen Kaufman, and I decided that maybe what we better do is really find out about what characterizes different segments of the audience here. And so what we did was a discriminant analysis. That was a procedure taught to me by Peggy while I was here, and I even wrote in my comprehensive exams about it. So it came in handy, and I knew it, so I used it. And what we did was we segmented the audience into 3 partitions: who had signed, who seems to be willing to sign, and who absolutely does not want to. And we created this organ donation willingness model that people are still using today. And what we were able to do was we were able to look at factors, I'm not going to tell you what all of them are, but that characterized each one of those segments. And then we thought, well, maybe this is early targeting of messages to different groups of people. So that's what we thought was probably going on there. I've put the journals down on the bottom of these. So here we see that we were at 35,000 people in '94. 2 years later, we're at 47,000 people on the waiting list. And we're at close to 20 there, we'll call it 20, and we were at 18 before. So this gap just keeps widening and widening. Medical science is doing their job. More people are, these anti-rejection drugs are terrific. People are able to receive organs, but they're getting on the waiting list. But we really aren't doing our job as social scientists very well over on this other side. Let's see. Excuse me, I think I went a little bit too far in my notes. Back to stories again. There was a lot of work out in Persuasion and Rhetoric, I think, right about this time, that was saying, let's look at whether statistical arguments or stories are more persuasive and why. So there was a lot of evidence one way or the other, and we decided, well, let's do that with organ donation as well, because there are a lot of newspaper articles that are out that we can take, and there are a lot of statistical arguments that we can deal with. So what we did was we used the heuristic systematic model of persuasion this time, but we created 2 messages of each type, because also at that time we were finding that we were being called on the carpet if we only had a single message instantiation for something, because it could be something peculiar to that one particular message. And what we found was, by and large, we did all these, outcome variables. We didn't ultimately look to see if somebody was taking cards, but we could see that all the emotional outcomes that we had, maybe emotion listing, fear scale, all kinds of things like that, the narratives were really evoking those. And these were narratives, these were our students at Michigan State who were our respondents here, but they were things about, a student died tragically in a car accident and the parents decided to donate the organs versus, the number of people on the waiting list and things like that. Well, those statistical arguments seem to evoke the cognitions. So we hadn't been smart enough to think about up front, well, why don't we test both of them in one message? But it seemed to us like this would be a good way to go for the future, especially because there are a lot of times that we want people to feel emotional, but also to be thinking about a message as well. Although some people in emotion say that it's cognitive. Anyway. Oh dear, what's going to happen here? So here we have 1998. And we were at 47,000 2 years before, and now we're pretty close to 60,000 people. And before we were at 20,000, and now we're only at 21,000. This gap is really, really getting wide. In 2002, by now, Jen, my former graduate student, was off at another university, but she wanted to work with us at Michigan State, so my research team at the time and another former student who was a faculty member then, were really interested in the work in organ donation that was saying that you really needed, to have a good match, you really needed somebody of your same ethnicity or race to have a very good match with your organs to be accepted. Right now, drugs have really come along, so it's not as important today, but it still is somewhat important for the match. And there just weren't enough African Americans on the donor list to donate organs. And so we started thinking, well, my gosh, what could this be? What could the reason be here? So we wanted to think about cognitive versus affective reactions, maybe to stories or something like that. And so we had a nice big sample from Cincinnati, and 40% of our sample turned out to be white, and they were, the ones with organ donor cards were white, I'm sorry, and 8% were black, who already had pre-signed organ donor cards. So we could see already there is a difference there. The African Americans had significantly lower prior thought and intent. Some of them hadn't even thought about it. But what we did find that was really interesting were no differences in lots of things. So there was no differences between the white and black groups in terms of anxiety, in terms of negative thoughts, in terms of favorable thoughts, negative emotions. There just weren't any differences there. So what we came up with was, well, we really probably just need to do a better job. And right then, a lot of organ donation campaigns went into black churches across the United States to really appeal to special values, family or religion. And we thought reactance really wouldn't be likely because we didn't see anything that thought that it would lead there. And that was in a journal in transplantation proceedings. So now we're at 2002. And from 98, we've gone up. It was 60,000 in 98. So now we're plus 78,000. And we had 21,000, and we've got just about 25,000 here. The gap keeps widening. So let me tell you, because of a study I'm going to tell you about, just a little bit about California and Michigan law and practice. So both of our states are what are called first-person consent states, meaning that if you sign, and you're on the registry, both have web registries now. We have about the same percentage of people who've signed up on the web registries. That technically, legally, it is fine if you would pass away that they could take your organs. But it's not in practice. No state does this at all. It's always family consent that is required. I know it sounds strange to people. People are looking at me, what? But it just is something that hospitals feel is good practice, and the organ procurement organizations as well. So that's why it's so important to talk to families so that they know what to do, because it's a critical step here. I'm going to just tell you about a couple more studies before I tell you about the campaign that we ran. This group and I were once again using the heuristic systematic model of persuasion, but this time we really wanted to look at the outcome of family discussion. And we further developed a scale that had been started by somebody else, Susan Morgan, who's in our field and has done a lot of research. And what we wanted to see was, well, what's the relationship of this willingness to communicate with family on prior thought and intent? And what is the relationship of that on processing variables, and then as well as on actual engagement with family discussion? And we found out that the willingness to communicate is positively associated with prior thought and intent. We don't know which way the arrow goes there, but it is also positively associated with message credibility. So if I'm willing to communicate, I'm more likely to see a message about organ donation as being credible. It is negatively associated with personal anxiety. So if I get nervous or upset or fearful, then I'm not likely to want to talk to my family. And the willingness to communicate actually did predict family discussion. So in this one, our takeaway message was, well, what we better do is to assess the factors that are barriers to this willingness to communicate. And that was in health communication. So now from 2002 to 2004, we've gone from 79 to 80, about 85.5, and from 25 to just about 27,000 people. 27,000 organs that were donated that year. At about this time, Peggy told you a little bit about other work that I've done. So all during this time, I've been doing all other kinds of work. And one of my colleagues, Hee-Sun Park, and I had been working on a campaign on our campus to get students to drink moderately, if not at all. And I guess we felt that maybe we needed a break. So we decided to bring some of the research that we've been doing there and move it into the domain of organ donation. And what we've been doing was looking at the social norms approach. Really, it isn't a theory, but an approach that says that when people decide what they're going to do, they look to norms around them. So they might look to the descriptive norms, like how much do I perceive other people are doing this? They might look to the injunctive norms, like do I perceive other people approve of this? Or they might look to subjective norms. Do other people really want me to do this? It's different wanting to do than improving, we found out. And we found out that indeed there were 5 separate types of norms there for both family discussion and engagement. And so we also found out that they all led in one way or another, whether they were moderators or direct predictors of those two outcome variables we were interested in. So we thought, well, gosh, you know, what we need to do now is to determine what kinds of norms are operative for the different behaviors and then try and invoke those in the messages that we do. And we published this in Human Communication Research, and it's been interesting to see that it's been adopted, this idea, by people with wide variety of behaviors that they want to deal with, including things like family businesses and such. So at the same time, right about the same time, that group and I decided that one thing we thought might work would be to get people who are going home for Thanksgiving vacation. We thought Thanksgiving is a time that people are with families more than any other time, and maybe we could convince them to talk about their wishes about organ donation during this week. Some people were really upset about this, I want to tell you. They did not like it very well, but we didn't foresee that. By and large, people were not that upset with it. So the Monday before Thanksgiving, we gave messages. The Monday after Thanksgiving, we assessed what had gone on. There were a lot of findings here, but what I did want to point out to you is that there were two different negative emotions here that were driving opposite reactions, and that kind of surprised us. But if I feel sad for others, which is obviously a negative emotion, I was much more likely to talk with my family. But if I felt personally threatened or worried or upset in some way, also a negative emotion, it probably wasn't going to happen at all. And so in 2008, we've moved from 2004, we had 86,000 people on the waiting list. We're almost to 101,000 there. And we went from 27 to 28,000 people, or 28,000 organs. I'm sorry, I keep saying people, I know. It's the organs that were donated the year before. Wow, this thing's getting completely out of whack, isn't it? So rather than tell you about all the different studies I've done over time, I could talk about them later. If you want to hear about any of them, I'll tell you what some of the topics are. I really want to focus now on this campaign that we ran. I had no idea how labor intensive it would be to run a campaign for 2 years. It was a complete shock to me. So it's good that I was naive before I knew what was going to happen. This HRSA call for grants was to play on an already successful program on a college campus. And we were fortunate enough that the Gift of Life Michigan, our organ procurement organization, had run 2 different campaigns on campuses over years. And what we thought we would do is we would play off those. So I don't think the people at University of Michigan were particularly happy that the Spartans were going to be running the Wolverine Buckeye Challenge for them. But we did. And we ran it for 6 weeks prior to their big football game, which is usually Thanksgiving weekend, where the winner is announced at halftime. And then there was another challenge that was later on. It was a January-February challenge with 15 to 17 schools, different years, in Michigan, but it wasn't focused on competition at all. It was just focused on the school. And both of them, before we got a hold of them, had just used traditional campaign methods. And so they had posters, they had flyers, they would go in lecture halls and ask people to sign up. They had information tables, and they'd done things like that. So our charge was to come up with some kind of theoretical perspective that was going to drive what was going to go on here in these campaigns. And so what we came up with was the idea of social identity. And the idea that when you have an out-group, you generally have a rivalry. Well, there was our perfect rivalry all built in from U of M and OSU. So that would be our rivalry campaign. And then we would have a campaign just focused on in-group in the campus challenge. And then we said, well, wait, it's not just good enough to have social identity. We've got to have social networking, too. And I was fortunate enough that Joe Walther worked on this campaign with me, as did Heesun Park. So I had an expert that was helping me along the way. And so what we did was the year before had just used the traditional methods. Our first year, we really thought we were something, and we were using Facebook ads. But this is back a few years. And you'll see examples of all these things. And these ads, you'll see either appeal to a competition or to the regular own school. And then in the last year, we used share strategies, and I learned a lot during this year. So we had widgets that were created. I'm going to show you exactly what they looked like. We used fan pages, we used fan outs, we did all these things in addition to the Facebook ads and the traditional. And just so that you know this, I'm not going to report on this now, but what we did was we created separate URLs. So if somebody was coming in from the traditional means, they came into this, you're going to see the sign up page for Gift of Life Michigan, who controls the whole state of Michigan for the Secretary of State's office. They came into one, and if they were coming in through our means, through the social networking, they came into a different URL. So we could really track those things well. So here we have our mock-up for our first Facebook ad, which is going to be tiny. I'm going to show you on the page. And it's our rivalry. And we had to get many, many, many approvals to use all the school logos, and especially to use these football helmets. You can't imagine. We had to send our ads in, and they had to be approved at each school. But you can see that down below we're saying the school with the most donors wins. And you might find it a little bit odd that we're using competition to enhance altruism. No, you don't find it. Tom doesn't find that odd. Others say yes, they do, but. Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm here at USC. Never mind. You understand. So now you can see that that's how tiny it is on the Facebook. And then what I'm doing is I'm always showing you the Michigan perspective, but the OSU perspective always has their helmet first and their name first. It turns out that Ohio, I don't know how this could happen across a border, but they're very altruistic there, and they have no problem with people signing up on the, really, they have no problem at all. When we started this, we were the second lowest state. New York was the only one that was worse than we were in terms of percentage of people who are on the state registries. And now we're a little bit better. But it is, and that's why, of course, when you find that, you can get a grant, because you say, oh, it's so bad here, you've got to help us. And they're likely to do it. Now, I don't know if you know your football coaches, but we had football coaches help us with our campaigns. And they were each so nice and so altruistic that it was hard for me to believe their fate later. So I'm going to test. I'm going to test the audience here and say, is anybody able to identify this gentleman?
He's got an M on his thing.
Yes. He has an M.
You want a name?
Yes. Thank you. You win. And Jim Tressel's over here. And do you want to tell the rest of the audience what's happened to these two gentlemen?
Well, Rodriguez just was pushed out by donors because he didn't win fast enough. Is now at Arizona. And Tressel, some of his players were illegally selling their merchandise, and he knew it for tattoos.
For tattoos.
And he covered it up. So he was, he reported that.
That's right. And now, if we were going to ask the next football coaches, would they like to help us with our campaign? I think they'd say no, because this is the last year for each one of them. But they were really, really nice. I was almost going to put the one of the press conferences up for you, but I decided that you'd get enough this way. But so this was part of what was going on. We would call this the traditional method. And here's just the campus challenge where we're using the logo for the in-group, and there it is, Save a Life Today, Spartan, be a Spartan. Here's the widget. And the widget turned out to be one of the more interesting things, for me anyway. And the fact is that we had to have somebody build it for us because I couldn't figure out how to do this. But widgets are really interesting because you can see down below, people can grab the widget and put it any places. Many of you probably already know here in this room, on Twitter, on homepage, on Facebook, any place they want. And so what was going on here with this widget was that real time, because Gift of Life Michigan keeps all the records for our state, that this got updated real time. And we were able to get into Ohio too. Now these aren't the numbers you're going to see from our campaign when I show you the numbers. These are actually the numbers in the whole state who had signed up during the 6-week period that we had. And obviously you can see that Michigan won that year. But what turned out to be interesting was, I don't have a widget for you for the other campaign, but I can tell you that we know widget views. And of this widget here, 125 views per time it was grabbed. The other one, which had no rivalry with it, 25. So 5 times as many here with the rivalry campaign as with the other one. So that was pretty interesting for us to find out. We also created Facebook fan pages, and we had fan outs. And we had to, you'd think to have a fan out would be easy, but it isn't, because you have to get to the administrator of the page and convince them that it's a good thing that they do such a thing. And we had 17 schools in this, and that was difficult, but we were able to do it. When people finally then said, yes, I think I do want to sign up, I want to be a donor, they would come to this page through those 2 separate ways I told you about, and they could check the Campus Challenge standings right over there, and then fill this out, and then they're on the state registry after that. So all of the numbers that I'm going to show you here in just a second really are for people who signed up to be on the state registry, not that big number. So they're quite a bit smaller than the other ones. So the year that before we came, the baseline year, no social media, they only had 224 people who signed up at the University of Michigan. And the year that we used Facebook ads, we were excited. We doubled it. We were only at 451, but still, you know, it was doubled. But then the year with the share strategies, it went up 8 times over baseline for this. So it was great. You're always worried when you do this, you enhance a campaign and you walk away, what's going to happen the year after? And I was lucky that I just received these data recently. So still pretty good. So you can look at it graphically like this and see that the year that we had the share strategies went way up. We had a little bit different patterns, but basically the same. Unfortunately, we went down our first year with the Campus Challenge. But it's much harder to control 17 campuses than it is one. So we'd hired people to work for us on every one of the campuses, and not everybody came through even though they took the pay, unfortunately. So we were much better about having people report into us several times a week during the next year and used everything. And we were able to double it, just about double it. But 80% of that group stayed the next year. So you can see that it looks somewhat the same, and there are both the patterns on top of one another. I sent these to Joe and Heeson recently when I finished them, and they both said, phew, it's good to see that we had some effects. Because you really don't know. I mean, you're living in the middle of this crazy field experiment for 2 years, and then all of a sudden you can run it one day and you can see what happened. So this has been a real learning experience for us, and we think that we found effects both due to social identity with the rivalry school, with the out-group having effects 8 times over baseline, whereas the in-group schools 2 times over baseline. And social networking as well, because when we had everything going full force, the effects were much greater than they were any other time. So what's happening now? And you can see that, well, today I told you we're at 113,000, but at the end of that campaign, 109,000 from 101 who'd been on the waiting list in 2008, and we actually have gone down in number of organs that were donated. So here's what I think. I think we absolutely, I mean, I understand, I'm going to hit the last point first. We have a bioethics group on campus, and I meet with them and talk with them about things. Many of them don't think we should be supporting organ donation because of some abuses of the system in other countries. Our country's got a pretty good, tight system, but ethics are involved here. I mean, as long as everybody lives within our system and goes on the waiting list and does things, things seem to work pretty well. Every once in a while you see people who have billboards, and why shouldn't they? I mean, if they need, or their loved one needs an organ, then they want to get it for them any way they possibly can. But should individuals be allowed to advertise or not? Obviously a communication issue. And from my perspective, obviously, we probably haven't done a very good job in social influence, because you can see what that gap looks like and how it keeps getting worse and worse. So the big story is that definitely medical science has really come a long way, and organ donation is completely viable if we only had enough donor organs, which we don't have right now. And for my research program, I just keep coming back to this every once in a while, going off someplace else and coming back and coming back and coming back. So I see myself being involved in this for a good long time in the future to come. I'm going to stop and get some questions and comments in a second, but just let me tell you some of the things I didn't talk about in case you're interested. I have some slides, but I don't have to show them. And that is on this project we did where we spent a summer in the transplant unit at University of Michigan Hospital interviewing people who were just about in their last checkup before they were going to become living donors. And that was very interesting. We have a more recent study that we did on ethnic differences and family communication patterns, and I could try and talk a little bit more about primetime autopsies if that was interesting to anybody as well. So with that, Walter, thank you very much for everything that you taught us along the way, especially about the narrative paradigm, and thank you to all my former professors in the room who helped me get as far as I am today. So let me open it up now for some comments or questions. Yes.
Was there a breakdown on college people between freshmen, sophomores, seniors, and juniors?
In intent.
Was sophomores and juniors sign up? Or?
Mike, I can't remember.
I'm curious.
I could go back and
What
check.
makes a difference between one year and the next?
Right. I don't know.
I just wanted to emphasize something that Sandra said about teachers learning from students. Well, the truth is, that's one of the main reasons why I became a teacher. I never had time to do all the learning I wanted to do, and the students did it for me.
That's true.
Yeah. It seems to me there's a combination in terms of getting people to do it between overcoming fears, objections, and overcoming inertia.
Mm-hmm.
And my sense of this is that a lot of where this would be effective would be sort of overcoming inertia. It's, something you think is a good idea, you've thought about it, no particular objection, but you don't actually do it. Mm-hmm. And it would seem to me that this sort of, particularly the rivalry example, would be a good case of putting in some motivating force that would overcome inertia rather than overcome. I mean, there's nothing in there particular that would overcome resistance or arguments or fears. So a large part of it is just getting somebody to do something that they have no reason not to do except they never do it.
That's a great point. And I think that the other thing to say is that this is a one-time behavior. I mean, you just sign up once, you can talk to your family and your family knows. So it's not like something we're asking people to keep a regimen day after day after day after day. So yeah, I think there were a couple questions right here, and then we'll go right to you. Well, actually, we'll ask one of the guests here first. Hi.
Hi. There has been some recent research that said that endorsements or labels from government entities like the Department of, or the state treasurer or something, whoever sponsors organ donation for the Department of Motor Vehicle to sign up or whatever, that endorsement has helped people to sign up. And I'm wondering if you're thinking about incorporating anything like a government seal or a government endorsement into the messages that you're creating.
Well, that's really interesting because in Michigan, we have a kind of a strange situation. Now it would be amenable to this. It's our Secretary of State's office, and our former Secretary of State said that organ donation was one of her champion causes, but yet she wouldn't allow the people in the Department of Motor Vehicles to ask people if they wanted to be organ donors. So it was a little bit strange, but the current Secretary of State does do that, so that's an idea. The Gift of Life Michigan works very, very closely with the Secretary of State's office, but our messages thus far have not added that endorsement, but that's a good idea.
I think Brian Quickett.
Yeah, sure, I know Brian.
Yeah, so he's been testing that.
Good, great.
It's been working out.
Good. Well, I'll ask him about it.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, thanks.
You know what I was thinking about, trying to get people to sign up for this, which is an important part of the process. But there actually might be a lot of donors who've signed up. And you're measuring the number of people, the number of donations, the number of actual organ donations in those slides for the history. But the people who actually sign up might be doing better than that, because after all, we sign up, and the probability of being in an accident to become a donor
in that one particular way, it
is small. So that really, that's one thought. But then, so you might actually be making more progress than you think, at least on the end of the people signing up as potential donors.
Right.
But then on the other side of things, it seems like the point of intervention is with getting people to sign up. I'm wondering if we would do better if we try to develop some kind of persuasive campaign around the people in hospitals who are making this decision in families. Because that is really the critical point.
Oh, it is the critical point, sure.
So
yeah.
I'm wondering,
I don't know if, I don't think that you could do a campaign.
No, I don't mean a campaign, but I mean some kind of intervention.
Oh, there are interventions. And the people who do that always work for the organ procurement agencies. And they are by law, the hospitals are by law required to tell them if they think somebody's going to die with brain death, so that they could possibly be a donor, although now there's other kinds of cardiac death that can do it.
Maybe social science methodology might be useful for trying to figure out what sorts of messages at that point might be more persuasive.
Right, and there are about 2 or 3 articles only that I know of on that, but that's definitely the case. Yeah, that would be good.
I have a question. I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but I kind of study economics, and the whole microfinance thing has become, people used to donate money, or rather loan money, small loans, in order to take, a third world situation and give somebody, an amount of money to help them, increase their sales of their local market, trade, and that sort of thing. So it went from altruism to now today, there are companies using microfinance principles to actually make a profit. So to see, to how do we loan money to third world countries in order to take, low income people with, basically a booth at a flea market and boost their business in such a way that we in the West can make a profit on their business. But anyway, so you go altruism to capitalism. So I was wondering if we could take this idea, which the incentive for people to donate their organs right now is just goodwill, it seems like, and move it to the capitalistic kind of motive where we say, we'll go and we'll donate plasma for $100 if we need a little extra cash. What if insurance companies would insure?
Some people would. I would be terrified.
Yeah.
But, okay. And no, this is definitely an idea that people are thinking about and have talked about for some time. But remember back to that act that I told you about, the Anatomical Gift Act. The sale of organs is banned in the United States, so somebody would have to do something different and change the law.
But there could be a different motivation, because there's a new program that just started in Israel. You know about this, and so it's building on yours. Is what is the motivation? And the motivation is if you become an organ donor, then a family member moves up in the priority list, which is a very, very different way of looking at it. It's the first country to ever do that, and so it's quite a. I mean, I think it's not monetary. Yeah, but it's a very
but there is an incentive.
Yeah, huge.
Well, we also have match donation here. I don't know if you know about that. So if I want to give a kidney to my sister-in-law, and of course people do interventions if you want to give a kidney to your sister-in-law because your own family says no, because that's not blood, and you don't give to somebody who's not blood. There's all kinds of things like this that go on. But say that I did and we didn't match, I could put my name in for this match program, and I might match up with somebody else who matches up here, and they've done up to, I think, a chain of like 11 of them in one day. But then someplace along the line, it's all on trust and goodwill that people are going to keep going ahead with their promise to do this. So, but that is definitely there, but not pay.
Yeah.
And then somebody who, obviously I should also tell you this, somebody who is a living donor, a kidney donor, because they're only going to have one kidney left, if there's some problem, they go to the top of the list. So that does happen here.
Did you look at all at potential donors' attitude toward the way the list was managed and who might receive their organ? Because I could imagine there might be some impediments there.
That's a really good idea. No, in fact, that hasn't even come up. So we've done a lot of focus groups about fears and things like that. And there are fears that somebody would declare me dead before I'm dead. And there are fears that I'm tempting fate if I sign it. And there are different kinds of fears. But I've really never heard about somebody having kind of a conscientious objection to the way the list is managed. But that definitely could be.
I don't know that much about
No,
how
but it could
this
be.
is managed, but I think it's largely in
Some
terms of
scandal
need.
questions.
Yeah.
There've been some
Not-
questions about whether favoritism is,
Yes.
whether celebrities, whether people with money, And
And
certainly
I'll-
in some countries, there's no question that
Oh,
things don't
they're
go
in,
on.
it's very bad in
China,
other countries.
it's a whole industry.
Yeah.
Or you imagined your kidney going to a pedophile.
Right. Well, actually, for a while, people on death row were thinking about donating, and people said no, they didn't want, because they're worrying about the soul sharing. There's another. Soul sharing, see the movie. We'll film it here soon. No, I mean the fears and things. So we're back to refutational messages again. Should I even talk about those things with people? Because all of you are going, oh, I don't want to do. I'm not going to do this now.
I think the critique, and an accurate one, for the sort of transactional model, capitalist model of say we overturn the act and we could sell organs, and it would incentivize people from an economic standpoint to not donate, but if my kidney is worth $20,000 to somebody, because they certainly do that with reproduction and transplants and things like that. But you could work your way around that law by saying, if you appraised a kidney or a certain organ at a certain amount and made it a tax-deductible donation. The critique against the capitalist model is that it preys upon or puts people in danger who are most economically disadvantaged, for whom that $10,000 or $15,000 is a lot of money. But to say, okay, well, you can deduct however much, a million, however much you appraise this for as a tax-deductible donation, it's not a sale technically. Now that's an economic argument aside. I do think that I do think that the argument about personifying the problem is that you made is really persuasive, because I think that people who might be willing to donate a living organ, yes, friends and family members are often the sort of motivating factor, but if you can. The ASPCA does this, a lot of nonprofits working with children in third world countries, or developing countries rather, do this. I think putting a face to the problem is probably, it would be interesting to see how the effectiveness of that.
Yeah, that would be. Actually, just to tell you a strange thing, there are people who are altruistic donors who just want to give to somebody. They don't want to know the person, they just want to give their organ. And the system up until now said those people are crazy, and they wouldn't accept their organs because they were worried about psychological repercussions from that. And then they realized maybe they aren't crazy, maybe they're just really giving people. And so now they've reversed that. And there are, in the sample that we interviewed, there was an altruistic donor, and that was a very interesting kind of thing. Yeah, kind of hit on what you were saying. Okay, well, I think. Oh, I'm sorry.
Have you done any analysis of like Match.com and whatever the organ versions of those are in terms of success? What messages tend to solicit organs more than others, or anything along these lines?
Well, what happens in the Match situation is that they already come in wanting to give to somebody else a level.
Oh, right, but there's like several websites.
Oh, are there? I don't even know about the website.
That you can go on and sort of plead your case, so to speak. I need an organ, this is my face, this is my story.
Oh, so it fits up with what you were saying.
Yeah, exactly. But I didn't know if there was, and it works. I mean, there's times where it's worked, but I'm just wondering if there was, well, how do those decisions get made, or if there's certain messages that tend to cluster around these folks with these messages.
Well, let me tell you that sometimes the transplant centers won't perform them. So this summer that we were there was really interesting. So we would watch every person who comes into this last clinic is interviewed by many people. including a social worker, to find out if, you know, the person who wants to give is going to have a good situation afterwards. Are they going to be able to get off work? Do they have insurance? Blah, blah, blah. Well, the other person's insurance is going to pay for it. And then every Friday, the whole group gets together and they talk about everybody from the whole week. And I saw them turn people down. There was somebody from another country who they were suspicious if it really was a relative, and the person couldn't speak English, and the translator, you know, that kind of thing. Or if they thought that somebody had the wrong motivation and that they were going to suffer later psychologically greatly, not physically, but psychologically, because they weren't going to get back what they thought they were going to get back from giving, they would say no to that as well. So even though you can find a match, it doesn't always mean that it's going to play out in terms of an actual donation.
I'm just curious if you've looked at the global marketplace for organs, with
you know,
people traveling to Singapore and places like that now,
yes,
where they can, for economic advantage, get priority on the list.
That's what the people in the medical ethics group talk about with me, and they're really upset by it. And I don't know as much about it as I probably should to be able to talk about it, but that is a real problem in their eyes.
Well, I think this was the form of academic soul sharing. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.